Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about some poetry that I found because it is Poetry Thursday, a wonderful day to talk about all the poetry that has interested me lately. Today, I want to talk about a poem that is about an unusual way of thinking about love. I am referring to A Half-Life of Cardiopulmonary Function by Eric Gansworth. For those who don't know, Eric Gansworth is a poet from the Tuscarora Nation, which I believe is Onondaga, one of those. He's part of that tribe. He is a poet mostly, but he's also written some novels and also done some visual art in his time. This is my first time encountering his poetry, but I do think it's kind of strange and a little bit experimental, which I'll talk about a little bit in the analysis section. And he also frequently talks about his own personal life and some elements of his native background in his poetry, which you see a little bit of today as well. So without further ado, let's talk about this poem. I will read it, do a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. A Half-Life of Cardiopulmonary Function. I used to think that if I loved hard enough and long enough, passion would always win out, like the way I loved cologne, venturing teenaged into congested malls, abusing testers only a salesperson surely enough, inquiring if he or she could help me in any way, spitting the prices of even the smallest bottles of the scents I had slathered on, forcing me out in a cloud of confidence that I was the Calvin Klein man, not the Old Spice man, not the Zest man, and certainly not the My Drafty House is warmed badly by kerosene heaters man, impervious to my real life where I would sneak down in the middle of the night, passing snow collecting on the inside of the windowsill, trying to descend the stairs silently, to complete the night lying before the stove's vents, blowing sooty warm air deep into my sleeping lungs, clutching a broken lacrosse stick to intimidate rats so brazen our house cats accepted them as equal occupants, until I exit those automatic doors, leave fountains where just out of range I envy white families tossing entire cigarettes packs worth of what they call spare change, wishing for things they could already buy if they wanted, laughing at those presidential faces fall sometimes up and sometimes down, all drowning in 3 inches of chlorinated well water. Return to the reservation where my sister-in-law embraces me later the same day, drawing deeply, saying she loves the scent of burned heating oil on men, that it reminds her of when she and my brother dated, and she would hold him long in those last moments before allowing him to walk out her door, meander through snowy grooves, finding his way home while she looked out the windows where ice crystals gathered on the proper side of the pane, holding her breath as long as she dared, letting his presence seep out only when she could no longer bear, leaving him to be a vapor ghost on her window. A fog sure to vanish even before she turned from the window, and here I am years later, living in that same state, you miles away, and I knowing how presence disperses into the air, wondering how long I can hold my breath. And so that was A Half-Life of Cardiopulmonary Function. In terms of analysis, I think it's easy to see what the poem is about. The narrator talks about thinking about love and the possibility of them being in love. And they go on to reminisce about their time going to the mall and returning home to their sister-in-law, who talks about the love that they share for the narrator's brother, before ultimately surmising that this is the state that they're in. This is the kind of love that they feel currently, as they wonder how long they can hold their breath in order to not let their love figuratively slip away. And it's a very interesting way of talking about love, holding your breath, as if any breathing will let that breath slip away. in some form. It's kind of like the idea of pinching yourself to make sure that you're awake, or even not pinching yourself because maybe you don't want to know if you're awake or not when something really good is happening to you, like falling in love. Because what if it is all a dream? That wouldn't be fun at all. So being able to hold on to that love in any sort of way is a pretty interesting way of thinking about love, that being so in love that you gather all the scents as well, and breathing it out, like it feels like a really big thing, but all it turns out is it's a vapor cloud, as they say later in the poem. She said, letting his presence seep out only when she could no longer bear, leaving him a vapor ghost on a window, a fog sure to vanish even before she turned from the window. And I think that part is interesting because maybe it highlights how our time on this planet is fleeting, that even though our love is big, ultimately we don't have a lot of time to share that love with others. So I do like how Gansworth really talks about love. It's very romantic, and I especially like how he tells this really long, convoluted story just to get to the point where he's like, oh yeah, and I feel that love for you right now. Another interesting thing about this poem is sort of the middle of it, where he goes on this long story where he talks about going to the mall and what he sees there, and how he returns to the reservation and talks with his sister. And I do think it highlights of the sort of inequality that might exist between reservations and non-reservation settings, noting how the people on reservations might not have a lot, like their houses it has rats and the cats don't really hunt them, kind of joking there, but highlighting that they have to use a kerosene lamp or kerosene stove in order to get any heat. And also noting how the white families typically just toss their money into the mall fountain, a sort of tradition, but to Gansworth, or to the narrator, that seems kind of ridiculous, because any money that they have, they should hold on to. They can't afford to spare anything by tossing it into a chlorinated water fountain that you can't ever get back. So I do think that element is interesting, how he slips in some commentary about inequality and the differences between natives and non-natives as well. But another thing that I think is really fascinating is the sort of structure of the poem itself. There's no punctuation apart from commas, no periods or anything. And so this poem, which is about breathing someone in and not wanting to let go any breath, is essentially somebody talking for what feels like several verses, so like a couple minutes straight, if you read this as it's written. And I think that's funny how he gets the structure of the poem to match the sentiment of the poem itself. How if you read it, you're just not breathing at all. Of course, I made sure to breathe while I read the poem, because that would have been very painful otherwise, because there's a lot to say here. But I do think that getting at that definitely helps add a unique side of things to this poem. So I think it makes it a pretty high quality poem there. Anyway, so those are my thoughts on A Half-Life of Cardiopulmonary Function by Eric Gansworth. A pretty solid poem, one that I'm happy that I'm found from an author that I've never heard of before. And that's what Poetry Thursday is all about, is finding those new authors and learning a bit more about how they see the world. If you read this before, or you simply want to comment on something I've said here, do so below. Let's have a discussion about this poem. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this poem and this author and Poetry Thursday if they don't know already. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and breathless travels. Farewell.